Today we have our new episode. We will discuss about always on connectivity. Connectivity is productivity. We have our world famous speakers, but I love to say world famous debaters because how they attend series of debate with World Talent Economy Forums. Many universities they're really impressed with the debate, as well as regularly they join in the open dialogue. This is also very much important. I want to share some good news already. Sabah and Sarawak, this is two different states in Malaysia. Their federal state government, they welcome World Talent Economy Forum for arranging public-private partnership dialogues, and definitely it will be hybrid mode. So they will invite us in offline, and definitely our honorable speaker they can join from USA in online. Beside that, we have a very good collaborations with Indian Water Ministries. They also want a special episode with us. Beside that, we are working with Australian government. So hopefully, this year's we have a lot of good news, and with all of our scholars, speakers, and debaters, hopefully we can change many problem, especially many social problem we will solve together. First, I would like to give chance, Mr. Marshall, how you want to share your views about connectivity.
Well, I think connectivity is important. I do recognize the fact that since COVID-19 exploded on the world scene and there was a lot of lockdowns around the world, and talking to different colleagues and different people, it's been a plus and minus from my perspective. One is the plus is that I've connected with people that I otherwise not would have connected with. And so the world has become more connected through forums like this and other software applications. And I met a lot of people and saw some very big opportunities through the EU climate bond and other capabilities to address climate change and climate repair. The downside of it is I think people are becoming addicted to their phones. so they're constantly if they're not playing. We were just talking about a word game that Britain is taking the rage, but in Britain on their phones, and people are just addicted to it. They just have to play the game, but they're also talking to people on the phone. You walk down the street here in the Northeast in New York, and if assuming it's not snowing right now, we're having another snowstorm. But when you walk down the street, you see people. They're not watching where they're going. They're looking at their cell phones, and you're wondering how they're not just getting into accidents and bumping into each other. So I think there's a plus and minus to this, but I think overall the connectivity is important. It's not going to go away. It's something that we need to address, and obviously I think it's like anything else. It's human behavior. We need to give people some awareness about it, and it's like anything else. People get addicted to other things. So there's programs to help people with addictive behaviors. So I think I think that's the downside. But if it's not addictive behavior, it can just be a benefit and a boon for people to communicate. So that's my take for now.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. How you want to share your views about connectivity and what you prefer, like this kind of online dialogue and discussions, or like offline dialogue and discussion is more effective?
Well, thank you, Sharif. I mean, we really easy today go to always on connectivity as we think about our mobile devices, because they tend to be, I know most of my friends never turn theirs off and sits around too much. I don't turn mine off, but I do put do not disturb on, and it has helped me a lot. But you see that going around quite a bit. But I go back to where we began always on connectivity was when we began to use things like DSL circuits for a lot of our internet access and things, which was a game changer versus the ability where you had to actively go and do things like the old dial-up modems that still give me anxiety attack all these years later when I hear those sounds. But always on connectivity has so many different forms. I mean, you begin to look at the Internet of Things, The Internet of Things, a lot of its application is based on always on connectivity. We begin to see the way the our life has become digital. You look at the traffic lights and all that stuff now is controlled mainly by internet protocol using digital devices and sensors. And they of course have to be always on and always intelligent that way. Uh, Databases are now designed to be for always on connectivity in our digital world. And we're seeing that just so many different ways as we go forward. Um, the big thing is the world has become digital, and most of our devices have digital components now that want to communicate. And our ability to take these digital devices, use our always on connectivity, our almost today ubiquitous communication technology. And it has really changed how we do business, how we live our lives, how we even drive. My car has always on connectivity, and it gives me on my screen, gee, the speed limit just changed. Oh, and you're going 25 miles over it. Uh, the traffic updates. There's traffic up here. Do you want to find a new route, even though I'm not using my GPS? So you see this type of digitalization on always on connectivity really helping shape some of the ways we live today. So, Sharif, I think that's my high level.
Thank you. Professor Rob.
Well, always on connectivity really is applied in most cases to the IoT devices that are being spread across the world and personal computers, be they smartphones or PCs. And the idea behind both concepts is to make sure that the vehicles, personal electronics, sensors are always feeding information back to the central repository. And as we develop artificial intelligence, those artificial intelligence entities will use and are using this information to make decisions. Right now, a lot of the information is going to people and systems that then cut that information down, provide it in some type of a format so that a person can make a decision about what's going on. We have had certain things that have been always on and always connected for a long time. Stoplights, connected stoplights, for instance, so you can sequence them, have to be connected so that they can be sequenced and so they can better manage traffic. The latest thing really is the always connected automobile. For those of us that are driving electrics, most of them came to market that way, and you can do some interesting things. Though I should point out that a lot of us discovered that always on isn't always on. Because one of the forums that I manage, there's a lot of discussion about how the cars tend to go to sleep if they've been left for a long time, and you come back from an airplane and you try to fire your car up or even find it, and you get a notification saying, no, the car's gone to sleep. So we can't talk to your car, and you're going to have to find it the old-fashioned way, and your car won't be preheated and ready to go when you arrive. Workaround, by the way, is to set a timer in the car and have it wake up for you when you come back from the flight. And that way you can do all these wonderful things. But we're really moving towards a time when most of the things that we thought as being kind of isolated and standalone are considering being connected. Now, there's a downside to having something always connected. When something isn't connected, it's air-gapped, and that means it's relatively secure against attack. When something's always connected and always on, it can be attacked at any given time of the day or night by anyone else that's on the internet. That means you have to harden the devices somewhat against attack, or you have to put them on their own dedicated network. So one of the things Dell has done with their own IoT effort is set up hubs, and the hubs are secure, and the always on, always connected devices just connect to the hubs. And that way the hubs can have that extra technology that allows you to secure them, and you don't have to spread that technology to all the peripheral devices. A contrary trend is really pushing the computational power to the always connected device so that it does some of the analysis at the edge and then only sends a subset of the data back to the central office. And that's to keep the amount of data being transmitted relatively manageable. If you get a lot of devices, say, connected cameras, and they're all sending everything they see. The amount of data loading you put on their backhaul is significant enough to have an adverse impact on the overall process. And so moving computational power to the edge is thought to be a way to mitigate that. So you're only sending the relevant information back to the central office. I've seen that go bad as well. However, Amazon was an interesting test. They have all of their satellite offices and their distribution center are always on and always connected, and that's how they manage their logistics. But there was a period of time when there were a lot of people that were receiving their packages extremely late, and it was setting up alerts that got picked up by headquarters. But none of the always on facilities were able to figure out why these packages were late. According to the reports, the packages were arriving on time. And what had happened is one of the central distribution managers had decided to distribute to the endpoint directly because he thought it'd be more efficient. But those central distribution points were only supposed to distribute to the satellites. And so they made a determination not to send data from deliveries back to the central office, because why send data for something that a distributor didn't do, but a distributor was doing it, and that was the problem, and that's why they weren't picking it up. So it shows an inherent problem of introducing bias into the system if these satellites don't send information that otherwise would be needed for a decision, because then the decision maker, either a man or machine, doesn't get the data they need to make that relevant decision and doesn't make the decision timely. In fact, doesn't even aware that there's a problem to make a decision on because that data isn't being sent forward. So it's an interesting area. It's really how our world is being redefined around us. In my own house, my washing machines, my refrigerator, at least one of the two of the big ones, is always on and connected. And the neat thing about the connected refrigerator is you can go shopping, and if you're not sure whether you have something or not, you can fire up the cameras in the refrigerator and take a look and see what's on your shelves and decide, hey, am I out of milk? Am I not out of milk? Is there something that I forgot on the list? And that's actually kind of handy, so you don't buy too much of something you already have or forget to buy something that you don't have. And that's one of the other aspects of having something that's always on in your home in terms of cameras. The other thing we use always on for on a regular basis is the security cameras around the house. When we're traveling, we get a certain amount of angst with regard to what's going on with the house sitter and with the pets. And with those cameras, we can generally check from wherever we are and see that the pets are safe and that the house sitter is doing her job. One time we looked and we found that the house sitter was acting frantically in the downstairs kitchen. And what had happened is the faucet had broken and was flooding the floor. But instead of calling a plumber or calling for help, she was trying to deal with it herself. And if we hadn't caught that and addressed the problem, we probably would have had thousands of dollars of damage to the home that could have been mitigated otherwise. And so the cameras have been extremely helpful, both for our peace of mind. Oh, we did notice at one time that the house sitter had let one of the cats out, and we were able to call her and let her know and get her to get the cat before the cat wandered off. And we lost a cat. We have a lot of critters out here, and if a cat gets out, there's a good chance one of those critters is going to eat them, and that's of course problematic for both the cat and us. So the always-on capability is predominantly to keep a monitor of things, to provide a venue, to provide for software updates and firmware updates, and to make sure that the centralized control structure is able to reliably understand what's happening at the periphery to make decisions and make decisions timely. And in our future, we're going to be surrounded by always on and connected devices, and certainly in places like the UK, they've got always on and connected cameras all over the place, and that's to a large extent how they maintain vigilance and keep crime to a relatively low level.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your excellent analysis, Mr. Adam. What you want to add today, especially we are discussing on connectivity. Even if you share some views from European cultures, so hopefully it will be helpful for us. Mr. Adam?
He was unmuted. His microphone wasn't working.
No problem. I think you join again. No problem.
No, can't hear you. We can see your lips move, but we can't hear you. Still
Okay,
can see
sure.
your lips move, but can't hear you.
Sure, sure. Yes, Mr. Marshall. So I think, yeah.
So I wanted to add something that both David and Rob brought up, especially in the beginning. I was talking about our personal connectivity, but I also think that Rob and David have brought up the issue of Internet of Things, and that's important to understand. It's ironic that today, this very day, over the past 12 hours, I kept hearing a repetition of the same maybe 10-minute broadcast by some BBC presenters on the issue that came up with people here in the United States being tracked by their own devices. So what are the devices that they were tracking? Apple has these tags that you can put either next to something or on something or on a key ring. So if you have your keys and you put that tag on it and you misplace the keys, you can track it with your iPhone and find them. So that sounds really wonderful, but a new phenomenon has occurred, and police departments, local police departments are beginning to become aware of it, is that people are being tracked by these devices where somebody slips one of these devices in somebody's car or in somebody's purse or on their person, and they're being tracked by people who may have predatory intent. And that is a downside, obviously, of technology. So it just goes to show you that technology can be used for the good and also for the ill. And I think that Apple did release some ability to notify people that as their devices are being misused. But here, it's not their devices. What's happening is somebody's slipped a tracking device into, and they're cheap. They're easy to acquire. And you put it in somebody's car or onto the bottom of the car with a magnet, you can actually track people around. So how do they deal with that? I haven't heard the solution to that yet, but I think that's something that we're going to constantly, as we're always connected, as Rob says, and there's constant connectivity going on. We need to understand, where does the role of privacy come into play versus the connectivity, whether it's the Internet of Things or it's the always on of our own personal devices, cell phones, iPads, or whatever device that we're using. So I think that's an element I just wanted to share.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Yes.
Great topic as we go through it, and particularly as we look at the commercial side as well as the individual. But there's also a lot of places where always on connectivity is causing some very interesting other types of impacts on us. It was interesting in a recent survey that in 2002, fewer than 10% of employees check their work email outside of office hours. Today, over 50% of us check our email before we even get out of bed in the morning. And so you're beginning to see even things like that. And we're seeing burnout as it begins to relate to our always on, always connected world. And it's beginning to get there. But on the other hand, with businesses, it's created an opportunity. As several of us mentioned, Internet of Things is always on. But increasingly, as we see chat bots and other ways of AI and things to engage, it's made it where businesses can take tremendous advantage of the always on connectivity. Governments can take advantage of the always on connectivity and things and begin to produce their jobs even better. The fact that governments can monitor their sensors 24/7, 365, and have artificial intelligence help adapt and change and notify, it's changed some of the way we govern, because we have to be more reactive in real time than we were in the past, where we could take some time and respond more. So always on connectivity has changed the way we as individuals work. It's increased our anxiety, decreased our sleep. unless we manage it well and change the way governments and companies work. So to me, it's changing not only technology, but even our social constructs. So Sharif, I think that's a great other way to begin to look at this.
Thank you. Uh, okay, Professor Rob, there is some question. What should be connected and why? Anyway, I think they'll have to learn more about IoT, Internet of Things. Professor Rob.
Well, so the concerns about connecting stuff that shouldn't be connected, in the United States, to a large extent, the nuclear power plants were not connected. Each one stood alone and was relatively well secured. The government decided that that wasn't the right way for security. That they wanted, not only did they want everything connected, they wanted everything talking to each other, which then opened up these nuclear power plants to attack. And we're not talking about cutting edge technology in most nuclear power plants. A lot of them were built decades ago. And so there was a fairly significant concern that if these things were connected, we were going to have a lot more serious problems. And clearly we've reported attacks. There have been reported attacks on infrastructure, but so far, at least to my knowledge, a nuclear power plant hasn't had to be scrammed, at least not domestically, for an attack yet. But there is that concern. And so generally the things that shouldn't be connected are either things where you really don't need the data off them and you don't want to worry about them being attacked. And things that could do a lot of damage if they were attacked, things that you want air gapped. I would argue that probably military weapon systems, to a large extent, shouldn't be connected to the internet. They certainly need to be connected to their controllers, but opening them up to the web could be problematic, because if somebody is able to hack through the security, you certainly don't want people, some hacker in overseas launching a nuclear missile or firing up a phalanx weapon system on board a warship. So the keeping things disconnected that you can't adequately secure, or where security, where compromise could do a significant amount of damage over a very short period of time, those are probably things that should be air gapped, or are certainly not connected to the internet. As we talk about privacy, and hovering back to what Marshall was talking about, the thing that's been in the news, at least here a bit, is the misuse of Apple AirPods. People using AirPods to track other people. They're relatively small. You can stick them on a car. In fact, we've had several folks we've got an application out here that the neighbors all use, and several of the folks have commented they thought people were tracking them. They were showing up at odd places and doing odd things. And one woman recently pointed out that there was a guy that was harassing her that apparently was tracking her as well. These are concerns. As we roll out the tracking technology, that people aren't just using them to track pets or their keys or devices; they're using them to track each other, which certainly would be a violation of privacy at the very least, and at the most could create situations where the individual is put at risk for robbery, rape, or death. And so there are concerns with regard to the spread of particularly the tracking sensors, like the Apple trackers, and creating a lot of problems with regard to concerns and security. So you need to be aware of the stuff that's out there, because some of the things that are tracking you don't have a tremendous amount of control of. And in a connected car, in theory, somebody can be tracking you. And there was a hacker that reported a few weeks ago, if I remember that correctly, that he'd been able to hack into 14 Tesla cars. And if you've got a Tesla or any connected electric, you have a certain amount of things you can do with the car that's remote, and you certainly don't want a hostile actor playing around with those features, because it could cause serious problems and perhaps even an accident. But certainly could do damage to the car. The early example of this, in this case, it was a good practice with regard to connectivity, but could have been a bad one, was some friends of mine that bought a Tesla, and they were driving through, I think it was Buttonwillow. There's probably about 115 outside, and they'd left their small child in the car, closed the car doors. The car auto-locked, and then crashed. And the child now is locked in a 115-degree weather car. And of course, the temperature in a car at 115 degrees can pretty much bake the child. They were eventually able to breach the trunk and get the child out, but because the car had crashed, in that case, Tesla couldn't connect to the car and disable the system. But think of what would have happened if a remote hacker had hacked into the car, had locked everybody else out, and then crashed the computer, so that nobody could control it either locally or remotely. That would have been a serious problem and could have ended up with the death of the child. So we do have to be aware that these connected devices have to be secure, and we have to be aware that they could compromise our own privacy. The class of devices that connected devices that were really problematic were baby monitors. Those were relatively unsecure, and there were plenty of reports of people firing up baby monitors and spying on the house, and really creepy stories of people that fired up a baby monitor and were talking to the small children that were being monitored. Really kind of problematic in that regard. And certainly people that have security cameras like I do, you want to make sure those security cameras are relatively secure. Your passwords and IDs are not trivial, and that nobody can break into those things and observe whether you're home or not, or observe you at home and then put those videos up on the web, which could be very, very, very damaging. The final thing to watch out for, people that make you believe that they've gotten into your connected devices. There are a number of scams floating around where you'll receive a letter saying that they've been monitoring you doing something that you may not have been supposed to be doing, or that was embarrassing. And if you don't send them some Bitcoins, they'll spread that information to others. 99.9% of those are hoaxes. They don't have access, but there may be a time in the future where they would, and that kind of implies that when you're in front of cameras like a lot of us are right now, and you're not using them, then if there's a manual switch to turn them off or a cover to put on them, might be wise to put the cover on and turn the switch off. Both of my cameras have either covers or mechanical switches, and if I'm uncomfortable at all about what they're seeing, those cameras remain off. In fact, in most cases, they should probably be off and hard disconnected when I'm not using them, because the other thing we've had is people hacking into people's computers that are always connected, and then observing them, mostly sadly women, and in bedrooms, getting undressed and then posting that stuff on the web, which can be incredibly embarrassing. So typically favor cameras that have a mechanical disconnect, and then use that disconnect if you're not using the camera. Will keep you a lot safer than if you don't.
Mhm. Thank you, Professor Rob. Mr. Adam. Yes.
Still no sound.
Still no sound. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry about that.
Actually, I heard a little bit of the hand clapping. So maybe the microphone's gain is turned way down, because I can actually hear some noise coming through the microphone, but the gain is turned way down, so we can't hear you.
Okay, you can try, Mr. Adam. No problem. Don't be puzzled. Take your time. Mr. Marshall, there are some questions from audience. Okay, we just, for this round, we just take some questions. Will IoT actually work over the internet, or will it have its own dedicated wide area network?
I think that's an excellent question. And just here in the United States, just yesterday, or it was the day before, I'm losing track of time in this pandemic. I have pandemic amnesia, as they say. But basically, in this lockdown is the area that I'm in because of the pandemic. An item came up on the fact that in the United States, they were going to begin deploying 5G networks, which is a huge exponential capability to deploy data in massive amounts. Nothing like the 4G or the 3G. It makes everything else look very huge. You may hear in the background of my mic, they're plowing the snow right now, so that's what you're hearing back there. But in the meantime, this 5G network had to be delayed in certain areas because they were afraid and this goes to the point that Rob was talking about and David were talking about, that that the networks themselves are able to interfere with altimeters on airplanes. So, for instance, when a pilot's landing at an airport, does he know what his real altitude is? Sometimes you're landing, you don't have, it's in fog or a cloud bank, you don't know what, so you're using your instruments. So if your instruments are faulty or getting a misreading, this could cause a dangerous event to occur, like an airplane crash or something. So they delayed partially in many airports in the United States. And I think that goes to the questioner's, the viewer's question about, will it be a separate network or not? And I believe that there is the capability to develop separate networks. But I think what's going to happen, no matter what we do, people will always be able, there will always be people out there that will be able to cross the divide. Maybe the benefit of a separate network for the Internet of Things is that it actually takes the burden off of human-to-human connections and allows the no gap, as Rob calls it, no air gap to occur for things that need no air gap. But I do believe that I think people are already developing separate networks. But look at the. It's not just the internet itself. It's the network of technology that's deploying the internet and other applications like IoT, Internet of Things. So you have 5G networks that are now being deployed. And I know that in other parts of the world, they're already beginning to work on 6G, which makes 5G look like small potatoes, as they say. But the 5G network is just astronomical. I was a part of a group in New York City at the Empire State Building. We had meetings there regularly before the pandemic, where we were working on 5G deployments. And I can tell you the difference mathematically in terms of connectivity it's almost unfathomable for the human mind, because it's much faster, much more amount of data. I mean, our brains process a lot of data unconsciously, but even that is amazing. I think we're approaching that type of connectivity and processing of information or data. And I just want to be clear that data and information are not the same thing. So data is the component or the bits and bytes of information, of content that give us the element that we can then, as humans, turn into data. Turn data into information. Information is for humans. The data is for the computers. The information, and as we get more to processing by computers, like in certain factories, I visited a factory in 2019 in which it wasn't like a Japanese factory where the robots processing auto parts. It was much more sophisticated. The robots were actually at the point where they were also making independent decisions based upon algorithms that were created. And I think as we get more sophisticated over time, we're going to come to a convergence. We're not there yet, but we're going to come to a convergence where not just the connectivity, but also the data and the information will be handled by robots or artificial intelligence. And we're starting to see that happening. In my sector of sustainability, we're deploying technology, artificial intelligence connected with keeping track of the feedstock that goes into the system and the outputs, so that we can see how much is there, how much is not there, and find out if something's missing, where did it go. So that's already happening on a practical basis. So I think as we move forward, we're going to see a convergence, as I said before, between all these elements.
Thank you. Mr. Adam, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, I can.
Hey,
Yes.
excellent. Sorry about that. I'm on my phone. Cool.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Well, one consequence that we must be mindful of, especially with this, the Internet of Things, smart cities, is the long-term effects of Wi-Fi and frequencies on our bodies. I remember Even before smartphones, about 10, 15, 20 years ago, people raised the issue of cell phones and the potential hazards of cell phones, and using them next to our ear, and of course with our brains being in close proximity, that could happen, or what could happen. And I think in recent years that issue has been pushed to one side, and because we are already living our lives in a notion of invisible frequencies, and they are so integrated that it's too late to slow things down because of unforeseen or foreseen health consequences. It's probably an acceptable risk now for most people, but perhaps we will see long-term effects after a few decades. And by that time, we might be a bit more advanced enough to develop some kind of better insulation and protection against the health effects of these devices and the network of signals and frequencies without compromising our reliance on them, and to keep them integrated in our lives. So that's the physiological dimension. Another concern is ethical and legislative, and it's been touched upon already in the show, in this episode, namely privacy. Privacy is our birthright, and the privacy argument raises concerns about having chips implanted in our bodies, meaning we would always be tracked and traced, and then people hit back against that with smartphones, of course. But I think that is kind of a false equivalence. I think the exterior nature of our smartphones compared to the interior nature of an implantable or already implanted chip is drastic enough difference to be seen as a kind of a false equivalence. Although I do understand the comparison, I do get it. With smartphones, you can still, of course, turn it off or leave it at home before going off out on a road trip somewhere, or smash it or throw it into the sea. And I guess with a chip implant, you could scalp it out yourself, but will it get to the point where such an implant is mandated? Perhaps. I hope not, but my body and my choice and all that. But maybe it would be a legal grey area, or illegal to remove it yourself, where only a trained medical professional is licensed to remove them and implant them in the first place as well, of course. I, for one, think that privacy is one of our sacred birthrights. And another argument with privacy is, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, then you have nothing to hide, thus you should be content with being tracked and traced. But of course, legislation varies wildly from region to region and country to country, and there are, in my opinion, some punitive laws for arguably victimless crimes, or laws that demonstrate tyranny and megalomania and extreme control of populations. And I think that being tracked and traced, leading to invasions of privacy, and knowing you are being tracked and traced, could still impact a person's quality of life and mental health, even if they're not doing anything wrong and have nothing to hide. It could still trigger attacks of paranoia and a victim complex or a persecution complex, which could then become a self-fulfilling prophecy and affect a person's mental health enough to actually maybe contribute to their lives falling apart. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor David Smith, and even I will ask later Professor Rob the same thing, because from Asia Pacific, let's say China, also some other country, they are doing research about 6G networks and connections. Can you share some of your views? What is the future possibilities and the future features of the 6G network? Professor David.
Sure. It's going to have many different effects there, but hang on a second. I'm going to actually have to jump off for a minute and come back, Sharif. We have a repair guy at my door that's replacing the fiber from the curb to my house. So it's going to knock me off the internet for a minute. I'll be right back. Yeah, Kelly, thank you. It took me a minute to hit the...
There we go. 6G. So 6G is expected in the second half of the decade. We'll start seeing some fairly solid specifications surrounding the technology, probably around 2025. We're on release 18 of 5G right now, and there'll be 2 more releases at least in 5G before we start really talking about and rolling out 6G. The issue that was brought up here with regard to 5G had really nothing to do with the safety of 5G per se. It had to do with the problem of the FAA certifying the aircraft to be able to handle that particular protocol. So far, no plane has failed the test, but the FAA had only certified 45% of the fleet for 5G, and that meant that anything that possibly could be altered or hurt by 5G would have to be turned off, and that included the landing technology that's being used in aircraft, which meant the aircraft would be grounded. The two carriers that were in question, I believe, were AT&T and Verizon, who have agreed to dial down the 5G capability within 2 miles of airports, and that will allow the FAA the time they need to certify the aircraft for 5G. But it's been successfully deployed across Asia and Europe near airports with no problems. But 6G could be a problem, given that the early specifications for it are substantially more powerful than 5G. One of the things it's supposed to be able to do, for instance, is penetrate mountains and allow you to connect if you're in a tunnel, which is something that 5G doesn't do well unless you've got repeaters in the tunnel. And 4G, of course, didn't do it all. So 6G looks to be much more promising. Expect much more bandwidth, greater range. One of the benefits of 5G was performance at the edge. It didn't drop off as sharply as 4G did at the edge of a network, and 6G is expected to carry that farther, increase the scope that a cell tower could cover, and have better performance at the edge as well. We're talking about moving an awful lot of data when we get to 6G. And of course, one of the things we're going to have to monitor a lot is battery life, because when you increase the power of something substantially, you increase the battery requirements. The other thing is how much it alters your body. We don't have a lot of tests on 5G yet, but we know with 4G, for people that use their phones a lot, it altered the structure of their brains. There was no behavioral changes noted, no wellness changes noted, but altering the structure of your brain clearly gave a lot of us a certain amount of concern. And that's why many of us use earbuds, which use a far lower powered transceiver than the cell phone does, just to keep ourselves safe. Adam talked about embedded technology, which of course is going to be problematic. We right now have a limited connected embedded technology, but for instance, pacemakers have been connected at least to a personal network for a while for management purposes, and there have certainly been instances where external fields have affected those pacemakers and had them act or respond erratically, which can be kind of problematic if you're using them to stay alive. Embedded technology is clearly going to have to be relatively hardened against attack, because if it's doing more than monitoring, well, if it's monitoring and it's not secure, it's going to violate a variety of laws across a number of companies with regard to privacy of medical information. But if it's active, if it's used to control parts of your body, like a pacemaker, like a blood sugar monitor, like any type of an assistance for promotion, like prosthetics, it would be really problematic if they were hacked. And we've had a number of instances where connected medical equipment, which to a large extent should not be connected to the internet, has been affected with catastrophic outcomes, mostly with malware and ransomware. But the effect is still the same. If a hospital loses the equipment that it needs to keep people alive, imagine during the pandemic, for instance, if the ventilators went offline, you'd have a lot of dead people really fast. And so in that earlier question with regard to whether things should be connected to their own network or connected to the internet, that's one of the considerations to make with regard to if you're connecting these devices and how you're connecting them. Devices that might have life or death implications, if they are connected, should undoubtedly be connected to their own secure network and into a secure hub that can be protected, as opposed to being connected to the web where they're not as well connected. And if they aren't patched timely and updated timely and monitored for malware and particularly ransomware, you could have a disaster on your hands with these connected devices. So back to Adam's point on embedded stuff in the body, if those devices were compromised in some way, that would clearly be problematic. And so thinking through the security implications of that and privacy implications of that's going to be critical before we deploy it. Of course, governments don't do things that way. They typically let companies deploy technology, wait till something blows up, and then set regulations to prevent a future occurrence. For things like this, that probably is a really bad idea. We should think through the security and privacy implications and put the regulations in place prior to deployment, and certainly during, if not prior to the trial stages, because even in trial, It doesn't matter what you've signed up for. If that device, kills you, it's going to be a problem. So the big one for the testing entity. So there are classes of devices that probably should never be connected to the internet and either be air gapped or connected to their own private network, and that network then needs to carry a much higher level of security. A good place for, as we develop quantum communication for the application of quantum technology, I think we all know at this point that quantum technology has the ability to breach any algorithmic protection that you could have, and the only protection against a quantum attack is a quantum platform. And so that's the kind of security we're probably going to need on medical grade devices and embedded devices before we're comfortable with their deployment. Particularly some of the stuff that Elon Musk is doing with regard to a brain mesh and connecting stuff directly into the brain, having that stuff go haywire or having ransomware in your head would not be a fun weekend. So making sure the stuff is secure is going to be critical in those categories.
Thank you. Professor David Smith. Professor David Smith, can you hear me? Yes, Professor Rao actually, yes, give a detailed explanation about 6G and different embedded technology. So, Professor David Smith, if you add some views about 6G technology.
Well, 5G, 6Gs are just different protocols that can be used with our internet speeds. And actually, what just happened here is a great example of always-on connectivity. The fact that when the internet repair guy came up to replace the fiber, he ran it across the yard, and they're going to come back in weeks and install it in the ground. But even the disruption there was kind of interesting, because as he unplugged it affected me here, but my alarm in the house went off. My surveillance cameras started yelling and everything else. So it's not until you lose connectivity do you see how connected you are. 5G, 6G is a way to begin to optimize the bandwidth that we have available to us and take out latency and others, and begin to do those type things. The downside of 5G, 6G is to get the speeds we need, to get the latency reductions we need. The cell size are getting smaller and smaller all the time. And the power is going up, which is affecting us. You've seen in the news the 5G around the airports, with airlines saying, I'm not going to fly the 777 jet because it's pretty susceptible to some of the 5G radiation into airports that have it turned on there. So we're still working to see how those standards to go. But we have an insatiable demand for access to data. And 5G, 6G is an attempt to help meet that demand. And you see the drivers of that. We are doubling the amount of data that we're collecting every 2 years. And that's a very steep curve. The number of connections just tremendously going up. The number of connections on the internet today, where it's a human involved with a human, is well down in the minority now, well below 40%. And it's just going there. But those are some of the answers.
Thank you. Thank you. This is really great discussion. I'm sure our audience learned a lot of things from today's discussions. Tomorrow we have a debate. Our debate topic, this house believes that university education should be free. I think there is a two team from government side, Professor Rob, from opposition side, Professor David Smith. So I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. I want to start from Mr. Marshall.
Okay, thank you, Sharif. And I thought this was a really informative conversation today. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I thought this today was a very informative conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, from IoT to the different networks, 5G, 6G, the replacement of 4G with 5G currently going on. And just as a side note, and David did bring it back up about the airports and the 5G, and Rob's clarification of 5G and how it affects airplanes. The United Arab Emirates Airlines just stopped deploying their fleets into the United States because of the 5G network. So just as a heads up, another piece of information to add to the mix. In an overview of all the things that are going on, the connectivity today is still dominated. It's becoming more and more automated. It's becoming more and more opportunistic, but also at the same time, threat levels are up there. So I think a lot of things are going to, like everything else in life, it's going to be up to people to be able to manage their connectivity, and also governments to determine what parts of the society need to be regulated and need to be communicated, especially in Western countries and developing countries that are advocating Western-style democracies. I think the key here is a set of rules need to be made, but lawmakers are always behind the curve. They're never up on the curve, and technology is outpacing a lot of legislatures around the world. So I think it's going to be up to people, and we even see today arguments about Facebook, or I think it's called Meta now. They own Facebook. And how they manage communications and connectivity. Today, I had to go to my wife's iPhone and show her how to manage on Facebook all the ads that keep streaming to her, and explain to her why that happens. It's automated, and so, but we need more options for people to handle the data and how to handle the data and assume responsibility for that data. Ultimately, it's like anything else. There is a risk and a return for the data that we have and the systems that we're developing. But again, as Rob pointed out, a lot of this can be life-saving material. If you have remote surgery, you don't want some hacker getting in there preventing a surgeon that's helping another surgeon in the surgical suite getting involved with that surgery. So there needs to be some stovepiping or some separate bands that allow people to do things without getting hacked. But that's always going to be a problem because there's always people involved, and there will always be bad actors out there who want to overcome that. But overall, I think the advancement for this technology for humankind is beneficial. And as both Rob and David pointed out, and as Mr. Adam pointed out, we have an opportunity to advance our cultures and our nations. It not only applies to science and everyday Internet of Things, but I've also noticed it's beginning to apply into the art world. One of the things that we didn't talk about is that there's a monetization of artwork called NFTs, and those are, it's like a currency in which you can put up artwork and keep the original artwork, but still sell it electronically. So we're going to start to see a proliferation in every part of our society, whether it's from practical day-to-day shopping, as Rob pointed out and David pointed out, and going out to the supermarket and then checking their through IoT, their refrigerators or their shelves, see what they have. And also, I think it's going to become more sophisticated than that. But ultimately, it's also impacting not just day-to-day lives, but also, like I said, art, literature, you name it. Everything that is a human endeavor is going to be impacted by the connectivity that we have and that is being developed. Thank you.
Well, it looks like I'm probably next. Sharif appears to be frozen. We need AI on this service. Looking at AI, I agree with Marshall. The critical aspect of this is how are you going to manage this connected technology so that it does good and not harm. That you can make sure that the decisions being made by the centralized artificial intelligence or human-driven structure are being made without bias and for the benefit of the folks that are supposed to benefit from it, and that these connected networks don't become problems with regard to privacy, security, or safety. And so doing this right becomes a much better path to just doing it. And my own concern is we're throwing a lot of this stuff out there very quickly and not really thinking through the implications of what would happen, for instance, if a lot of these connected cars suddenly were compromised, where somebody was able to take control of the cars and alter their behavior at once. I'm still I still recall a movie a while back, which isn't possible now, but might be possible in the future, where the vehicles were compromised and then started driving around all by themselves off bridges and outside, right out of parking structures. And the technology is capable of doing that, and hopefully before we get to that point, we'll secure it to a degree that it can't be compromised in mass. We also need to really think about what we're connecting and making sure that stuff is secure and is reliable. It isn't reporting a biased set of data, and that data stream hasn't been altered so that bad decisions are made and that people are harmed as a result, or pets or whatever else is being monitored. So the security and efficacy of the mediation platform has to be solid, and we have to make sure that we can trust the technology that's being deployed. I don't think we're there yet, and a much deeper focus on trust and assuring that trust, to me, I think is needed before we go crazy with a lot of this stuff. Let's see what happens with job losses. I'm throwing up a lot of questions fast. Can't read them very quickly. With any type of automation, you do have to look and in parallel think about retraining the working populace. We're really talking about connected devices here, not necessarily full-on automation, but they are related. And so thinking through the broad implications of a deployment becomes not only if that deployment becomes compromised, but for any jobs that are lost, and making sure that people, particularly if it's people at scale, are retrained and put back in the workforce, so you don't solve one problem and create another bigger problem as a result. And large-scale unemployment would be a much bigger problem. Governments have been overturned by problems like that. So making sure that you've got things managed in terms of anybody that's losing their job, finding a new one and being retrained in order to do so effectively becomes very important. But securing, making sure the process is solid, and making sure that these connected devices are not doing harm or can't be made to do harm becomes a critical aspect of any deployments.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Mr. Adam, what's your concluding remarks for today? Mr. Adam?
Thank you very much. I wanted to second some of Mr. David Smith's concerns or points he highlighted about impact on people's behaviour with increased non-sensitivity. Mentioned that people have gone up, people checking those as soon as they wake up, before even getting out of bed. So this says to me that self-discipline.
I'm sorry, Professor David Smith.
Well, for a session on connectivity, we've had our share of connectivity challenges today. So, I think this is just showing that connectivity is, as we look at faster speeds, as we look at more ubiquitous connections, there's going to be growing pains. And we're showing it right now. Let me just take a second to and answer a couple of the questions over in the comments, if you'd like me to, Sharif. Is that okay with you?
Yes.
So, I love some of them looking there. And like Alayla says, what should be connected and what shouldn't be connected and why. There's really not a lot where you begin to do it, because one of the other questions is, will Internet of Things actually work over the internet, or will it have its own dedicated wide area network? Well, the internet's based on IP protocol, internet protocol. Most of the other private networks are based on the same thing. It's just how you connect them to each other. What we're seeing though is most private networks outside of some very specialized ones have connectivity to the public internet as well. And you see that happening. Um, you also begin to see that Internet of Things will work in their local area networks and connect to wider area networks. But the goal with Internet of Things is to be able to take the sensors, take the data, and communicate more broadly and create a peer-to-peer network in many of these instances. And you see those protocols going and putting it in place. Um, I love Virginia's question, though. The expansion of connectivity is a determining factor to increase actions and optimize research and knowledge exchanges. Well, group intelligence is a big thing. And what always on connectivity has given us and global connectivity has given us is you've heard me say in the past that location today is not necessarily a physical location. It's where you get the competencies and capabilities to do what you need to do, be it in Brazil, be it in Malaysia, be it in the United States, be wherever it is globally. And this always on connectivity is one of the enablers that is moving us there pretty fast. And yes, it has helped us with research. It has helped us with commerce. It has helped us with regulatory actions. It has helped us even as we begin to look at how do we transform the way we govern people? How do we do education? You know, we saw with COVID, education very quickly adapted to a virtual learning environment. And we're now seeing universities begin to do the same thing. Some of our leading universities in the United States today are going to virtual campuses right now because of the COVID surge and other things like that. So this type of connectivity is changing the way we increase our actions and how we optimize not only our research, but our performance executing business and commerce. And it's touching all parts of our life. Uh, and we're actually beginning to see this always on connectivity create a rising boat of job opportunities outside of the local regions you have there too. And so it's affecting many different places with it. And I see this as a plus because always on connectivity in the shrinking world is showing us the importance of continuous learning and also just in time learning, which is another big trend that is enabled by our always on connectivity. So, Sharif, the impacts I think are pretty broad. And Virginia brought up an excellent point of its impact of doing all these other changes as well. So, Sharif, I hope that helps.
Thank you, everyone. This is really great discussion. I request all of our audience, please share our content as much as possible with your governments, with your corporation and academy. Hopefully, tomorrow we have our debate, and you will enjoy our debate side by side. Next week we have our summit on talent economy. Yes, 4 sessions on regular open dialogue, and definitely we have a debate in our summit next week. So thank you, Mr. Marshall, Professor Rob, Professor David, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Thank you. Bye-bye and take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.